Okay, I think we can get started. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us, especially those of us who have joined at quite late notice. Thank you very much. We do have a little icebreaker just to get everyone started and just to help to get everyone into the right frame of mind. And this is an easy one. If you could eat only one cuisine for the rest of your life, what would that be? Answers in the chat, please. Okay, this is looking good. We've got tacos, South African braai, bean stew, curry, Indian cuisine. This is sounding good. Wow, dumplings, dal. This all sounds good. You can probably tell I haven't had lunch yet, so this all sounds really tempting. Awesome. Okay, well, thanks everyone. Yeah, so Luciana, could we have the next slide, please? Okay, so today we're going to be telling you about the Standard for Public Code. So Jan is here and he's going to be presenting his slide deck for us, really talking about some real world applications, some practical tips too, as well as additional resources to find more support and guidance. And of course, he's going to also talk about the continuing stewardship of that standard moving forward. And we will leave aside a little bit of time for some questions and answers at the end of the session. So our speaker today is Jan Ainali. Sorry, I probably haven't pronounced that very well, but thank you. He is the code-based steward for the Public Code Foundation. And his fun fact is he's actually an admin on the Swedish version of Wikipedia. And you can see there's some contact details should you wish to get in touch. Okay, but I think with no further ado, let's hand over to yourself, Jan, if you would like to start presenting your slides.
All right, so let's see if I can share my entire screen here. There, share. I want to go with the entire screen. And that, yes, but with a zoom window in front of it. That should do it, I think. And I'll go back to this one and then I'll find the zoom here again because I want to put something in the chat for you. Maybe I'll find that somewhere else because as you can see here, there's these slides are already available online, but I'm going to give you the link here so you don't have to type it. There you have it. Because there's going to be a couple of links in the slides, which will be very handy for you going forward, I hope and think. So that will be... why do I get this double? Can I move this out of the way? I can. Yes, very nice. All right, so I'm at the Foundation for Public Code and I work there as a code-based steward. And what we're trying to do is we help to make public organizations collaborate when they have decided to work with open source. And we were founded in 2019 and we're a non-profit. We're based in Amsterdam. We aim to work globally. Unfortunately, our funding model has gone not working out very well. So we're actually cutting all our staff in Europe. And this is my last day at work. So I'm going to talk a little bit in this here, what's going to happen with the standard and how it's still going to be useful. But the way we have been helping people is what we call code-based stewardship, which is a sort of mentoring or coaching of code bases. And our primary tool for that has been to work with the Standard for Public Code. And I have a copy here. The image here is some of the early versions. This one is from earlier this year. It's version 0.8.0. And the main purpose of this standard and what sets it apart from other technical standards is to enable public organizations to collaborate. So it's not really a technical standard. And the focus is on collaboration and specifically for public organization. And that's why it's a little bit of a novel. It's filling a niche, something that didn't really exist before. And the idea with it is that if someone complies with it, it should be fairly easy for anyone to collaborate with you. And as a result, also be guaranteed that they can replicate it somewhere else. Because if you can't set up your local version to try out stuff, they cannot collaborate either. So sort of reuse is sort of like a requisite for collaboration rather than the other way around. Some people focus on the replication, but here we focus on the collaboration. And of course, you need to be able to really replicate it as well. And we have been using this to take a look at code bases, to audit them and the contributions coming in there. Like, are these improving the ease of collaboration or not? And we've been working on this for 5 years now. And I think we have collaborators from 11 countries and 4 continents. And our philosophy is that no one should be really surprised when they read this. This is really a collection of established good practices. So hopefully when you pick this up and or go online to standard.publiccode.net, you will recognize a lot and know, oh, we are already doing this and we're already doing that. Oh, yes, of course we should do this. We're not doing it right now because we had a deadline. We'll document that later or something like that. So even though you probably won't be surprised by anything in it, it's quite likely that you're not meeting everything out of the box because this one is very thorough and looks at many aspects, and I'm going to come to that a little bit later. And it is, of course, an open standard. And in itself requires open standards to be used. So you can reuse it, adapt it if needed, do whatever you want. But if there's something there that is not really working for you or your processes somehow, then it would be very valuable that you submit those opinions or proposal for changes to the main repository so that the entire community can benefit from your ideas. But you don't need to. You can just do that locally yourself if you don't have the time. But it would, of course, help the community. And we've built the standard, taking different criterias into account. And each of these criteria is sort of like a collection of related requirements. And as you can see on this slide, I hope nothing is really sort of like what is this? I don't know what it is, but rather I hope that most of this should be something that, yeah, this makes sense. This should be in there. But it's also not really set in stone. So we have developed this over time, and the newest one in here is make the codebase findable is the newest one. And we have considering adding a new criteria about long-term archival, but we're failing to find good practices that people are actually using. So while we have had talking about that in our community call, it's not really in the roadmap right now, but it's of course open for discussions for all the active users if something needs to be added or changed. And I tried a couple of times when I talk about this to actually group these criteria because some of them sort of belong together. And one sort of grouping is dividing them into 4 areas. Whereas the first one is, well, you have to start to make it practically or theoretically possible to even join you in a collaboration. And what that means, like, Well, if your code isn't in the open, of course, no one can collaborate with you on the code because they can see it. But it's even more than that. Like you need the backlog, the issue tracker, the roadmap, so that you're not developing in a walled garden. And we have 5 of these that sort of have these different aspects. Like, so you obviously need to have an open license because otherwise it's not going to be an open source collaboration. It's going to take much more time. And if no one can find it, of course, that's also a very practical hindrance for collaboration. So without these 5, there cannot really be any true collaboration. And then we come to something that is more cultural, perhaps. Like, how would you like to collaborate? And tell people how you do that. Are there any particular ways or standard that when someone submit a contribution or make a pull request or anything, how do you want it to look for you to be able to accept that into the code base? So you have to be really clear on that, how people can help, making them feel welcome and make it easy for them to contribute. So they don't first contribute and then you come and say, oh, you should have done it this way and this way. That will often make people feel bad, and they might go through with this contribution, but they're not very likely to come back unless they're being paid for it, of course. So yeah, and then of course you need to explain the details, like how is it working, what goals are you trying to achieve, and what technologies are you using to do this. Without these, there will also be practically impossible for someone to do a quality contribution. So document your objectives, really talk about what is the aim of this goal, so people are not coming out with these features that doesn't really make sense for you, because then you don't want to maintain them. And document the code really well so that people understand what it does. And this is actually also, and this almost applies to the entire standard, it's not only for collaborators, it's also for future you or future people in your organization, so that when you have a new hire, they can just look at the things and everything is explained. Use plain English, simple language. We also even say that you should use English because that is sort of like a lingua franca for code development. It doesn't mean that you are not allowed to have additional translations, but at least there should be in English. So you can have any number of translations. And we also make a difference between authoritative translations that really needs to be in there. So for example, if there was a Swedish code base made for Swedish civil servants, then it has to be in English because there's a law in Sweden for that. But then of course it can be in English as well. And then it could have courtesy translations in all kinds of languages. But the difference is there is like, what do you need to make a new release? Make that really clear. And then it's good to know how mature the code base is, so that people know that, like, are you still experimental or are this being used in production and really stable? And this last one, which is sort of novel for this standard, is similar to document your objectives, but really, if the code base trying to solve a policy, then tie that together so people know that, oh, these things are not really negotiable because this is why we built this and we have a law that we're trying to solve the needs for somehow. And then finally, the last area is like create a process that makes it easy to collaborate, so there don't be a lot of friction if someone from outside your organization tries to collaborate with you. And everyone who is developing code won't think that twice over maintaining version control. That's very easy. require review of contributions is sometimes not as hard enforced, but we think it's really good for keeping up the quality. And then using continuous integration and having a coherent style, which in turn makes it easier to collaborate, submit the contribution in the proper style. So these were the 16 criteria. And of course, they in turn have a lot of requirements, and we're not going to go into each and every one of them. In fact, it's 112 requirements in total. So here's just on the screen. Yes? No?
Don't have the paper.
Here's just an example of them to show that all requirements are not equally important. So we have 3 different levels, and we follow this IETF request for comments, which say, well, must, these are things that you must have. The shoulds are really strong shoulds. So you need to have a very good document reason if you're not meeting those, whereas optional are truly optional. And of these 112 requirements, 46 are musts, 51 are shoulds, and 15 are optional. And then perhaps a little bit unusual for a standard is that we also have a little bit of guidance, what different roles need to do. And we have added that because having a buy-in from just one level, just from the developers, it is not enough if you want to have a code base that supports collaboration with other organizations. So then you need to have buy-in from each of these levels, or something will go wrong, because collaborating is an investment and it is a bit of an upfront cost, whereas as it scales, it's gonna yield dividends, and sometimes you can even step out for a while and it will keep developing because you have created a flourishing community. So is it easy or hard to meet the standard for public code? Well, it varies a lot, and it depends a lot on your code base and your community. In some ways, you could say that it is hard because so far, no one have complied with each of these 112 requirements, or not even all of the musts and shoulds yet. Often, like the licensing part, it's very straightforward, because if you're an open source project, basically you only need what's everyone else is doing already. But when it comes to working in the open, since we have focused on working with public organizations, that is sometimes not very common. So it can be a huge cultural shift from having your processes being only in-house to open it up to the world, to have others being able to see your backlog, be able to comment on your issues, and come in with opinions. So that is more of a organization mindset that need to change, and that can sometimes be quite hard. And of course, if you're not a country where English is an official language, like here in the Netherlands, where everything might be in Dutch from the start, then it can be a lot of work to make the documentation in English. And the question is, will these all lines of levels of stakeholders that I listed in the slide before, will they all buy in that we should do this work right now? So really, like, the earlier you start saying, oh, we want to be compliant with the standard for public code, the easier it will be, because you're not building up this backlog of things to fix in the end. And then for compliance and certification, it is an open standard. So anyone can just start using it right now. It's available online. It's CC0. And I think over the years, we have printed around 1,000 of these copies circulating around in the world. So that you might have seen one here or there already. And it includes a review template, and we're going to take a look at that in a while. And our goal was when we were making the assessments that we publish all of them on standard compliant.publiccode.net. And I'm actually going to see if I can show that just to see how it looks live. So here is this site where it says here there are no code bases currently, but these are some code bases that have made a public commitment to meet it. We're going to pop in on some of these. Or maybe we'll do that right now, really. So in the OpenStack community, they have said, yeah, we're trying to meet the standard for public code. So anyone making a contribution can expect that someone will evaluate it towards that. And then they publish their entire evaluation here as well online. So anyone can actually also review this. And that brings us back to the presentation here. And if you're compliant, you can use this little badge, which says which version was being checked. But as I said in the beginning, we're not going to have any staff from the Foundation for Public Code from April 1st. So what we're doing now is that we're taking the people who are most active in using them and inviting them to be a community, setting up a steering team. We have a new governance file drafted so that this can continue to be a living community. And then, of course, we won't be able to do any assessments. So we're thinking about or encouraging the community to do peer assessments. And of course, then the key is if the assessments are open, anyone could challenge it if you think this is not properly done. And we had a community call last Tuesday to get these things going, and the next one is the 25th of April. So you're very welcome to join and help build this community. And we saw the OpenStack live there. Here's maybe a more zoomed in one. This is from the Signalen community. So this is a code base used in Amsterdam, where on the front end side, citizens can report perhaps like here's a hole in the street, or here's the street sign has fallen apart, or the garbage can is overflowing, or anything like that. And then this is being routed through some algorithms to the right department, and there's a case management system in the back end keeping track of what everything is doing. So they have been using this to make sure that they can collaborate with other municipalities, because of course this is not unique to Amsterdam. Any municipality could use the same system. And right now, I think since we started working with them and it was only Amsterdam who was the user, now there's 20 Dutch municipalities using it. And now the Danish municipalities are starting looking at this. Oh, this makes so much sense. We want a similar system. And the review template that we can see here have the requirements, of course, in one column, and then the sort of well, does it meet it or not? And then the idea for us first was we are the one merging this, put this to stamp, so it doesn't need to be a lot of information, but if it's going to be a community assessment peer assessed, then the links and notes field becomes really relevant, because then anyone, if you put in, like here we can see there are links to the licenses. Anyone can go and see, yes, they are using open licenses. Whereas the second to last one here, where it says checked with continuous integration and links to a pull request, makes it a little bit harder for anyone to see it. You need to be a little bit more technical. So there we would encourage them to go in and make this these fields this comment field a much more clear. So it really tells why they think they passed it. And then here we see just a second screen where we, in the first one, well, if you go to signalen.org, you can really see that there's an ambition from the community to make this reusable in different contexts. But this can, of course, also be expanded on in the future. And then we see also here, like some of them are not met yet. So there's some text around that. And the idea is then that when you meet everything, then each new contribution to the code base should continually be certified so that you check, oh, we didn't lose anything right now. So we have a little flow chart and to check for that. And of course, when you're starting, you don't want to go in and do all 112 from the start. That takes a couple of hours to do. I think on average, it takes about 6 hours to do it after we have been doing 15 of these evaluations. So we made a little tool where you can just have 10 yes/no questions, so you can see how close are we. Do we have a lot of homework to do before we should do a proper evaluation? And then we think it's also important to signal that you're striving to do this. It builds trust. People see that you are in this for the long haul and to do it something better, and also set some expectations for the contribution, that it needs to be a little bit of a level to it. But then, of course, we see a lot of people are already solving this, meeting these criteria. So we are starting to collecting them in an implementation guide or a companion, if you want, where we have all these examples of, oh, this is what you should put in your README, or this is how you write a good contributing file, or this is a way to do certain kind of tests. And the idea is that if you're using something from this implementation guide in your own code base, the same method, in the good spirit, then you should almost be certain that you will pass that requirement as if it were assessed by us then. There are also some further reading and some templates where like they're empty, so you need to actually fill it with something meaningful. But it's really starting to get a lot of good things in there already. And then, of course, not everyone wants to have it in English first. If you're taking this to developers, English is often enough. But if you want the managers and the policymakers, perhaps in some contexts, other languages are also a requirement. So we started this community translations project, and Spanish is already published. So if you want to read the standard for public code in Spanish, it's already there. Danish is in review. Traditional Chinese is almost done. We started the Swedish and Finnish, and there is some people working on a German, which we haven't really seen that connect yet. And then I just wanted to show you a little bit. We also have a governance game to help you figure out your governance. In the standard, we're not very prescriptive with like methods in general, because there are a lot of different ways to use it. So we don't say you have to do your governance like this, but instead we show these are some different governance models, and here's some tools for you to figure out how you want to do it. So I actually have a couple of hundred here of these here. So if you're never ever nearby Amsterdam, or if you happen to see me at a conference in the future, just reach out to me and I'll make sure you get one of these. And I think that was my last slide. So we can open up for questions now.
Great. Thank you so much, Jan. That was an excellent presentation, and we really appreciate you taking the time, especially on your very last day, to come and talk to us. So thank you so much for doing that. I must say, from my perspective, at my previous organization, we tried to put together community guidelines for developers for at least 3 of our products. sort of contribution guidelines. And I wish we'd known about this and this had been in place then, because it would have made our lives a whole lot easier. So, and yeah, very sorry that the foundation is no more, but we do think this is really relevant work, and we really hope that you will, continue to be able to find a way to keep this moving forwards through the
Yeah,
community
and
engagement.
thank you. And just to nuance that, so the foundation will actually continue to exist. It's more like a non-profit without any employees, so it will be not a lot of activity, of course, until some possible further funding comes in, and then it might dial up again. There is a North American chapter, but that is more of a network of contractors, so they won't be able to do this same kind of work that we've been doing here based in Europe, but on a global scale. It's really targeted for the American audience.
Great. Thanks so much for the clarification. That's very helpful. Also, in terms of that call that you mentioned on the 25th of April, do you have details for how we could get involved? Anyone who's interested, how they might be able to join that particular call?
Yes, I do. I should have put in a link there, but I realized I didn't. So let me see if I can find that quickly, because we do have a link already for it.
Okay, great. And then maybe while you're looking for that, I'm going to open it over to the floor. Does anyone of our attendees have any questions for Jan?
Thanks so much for this presentation. It's really useful. I think a lot of the digital global goods, they're clearly already open source products, but they are, I'd say there's a lot of different criteria that we are kind of comparing ourselves against. From Digital Square offers some criteria in a maturity model. There's now the DPGA, the Digital Public Goods Alliance, that has another set of criteria, and I think the list goes on for groups working in this kind of international development space, from different UN agencies and things. It seems a little bit like that this could be an overarching framework that, if you move toward this public code framework, it would be compliant with pretty much what any of these other criteria are thinking about, right? They're all just a subset of this one. But so I was kind of just curious, is that how this is being thought about? In our other UN agencies kind of exploring shifting more toward this framework? And Linda, this could even be a question for you about Digital Square. How does this relate to the maturity models and some of the criteria that Digital Square puts forward? Over.
That is an excellent question, and really, the Digital Public Goods Alliance, where Foundation for Public Code is a member, have been discussing how they can use this when they evaluate their code bases, because right now they use their own Digital Public Goods standard, which is much smaller, and they have been a little bit hesitant because it's so big. Whereas if you take a look at the Digital Public Goods standard, it's only really 9 questions that you can answer. So you can answer it in a half an hour and an hour if you know your project well. Whereas here it takes, I don't know if anyone has done this without our help and reported how long it took them, but I think the shortest time we have done it with a code base, it's like sitting down with a senior developer and perhaps a project manager and go through it. And then it takes about 6 hours, because it's really to understand what everything means in it, and then dig up the right links for the documentation. So I think that's why some haven't put it front and forward. But in our talks with the Digital Public Goods Alliance, they're certainly having that discussion internally and thinking about how can we use this to make sure, because of course they don't only want to collect all of these like in the register, they want this to be the people in their digital public goods network to also be collaborating with each other. So and that is where I think this is the key for the future.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jan, and for the question, Jonathan. I think maybe what I can add to that is to say that, from Digital Square's perspective, as you know, there are many initiatives that actually look at something similar. Certainly, we have R2 maturity models. UNICEF, I know, for example, has Jenga, and there's Dial, there's the Digital X Exchange. There are a number of different initiatives which are looking at, I guess if you describe it as a Venn diagram, there's a core that is very similar or the same across many, but there also are a few differences. And in fact, some of the things that Digital Square is involved in at the moment is we are working with DPGA and UNICEF to try and see if we can rationalize our three models and our three sort of standards. I think, what strikes me about the one for the public code is that it's so comprehensive, and it does seem very, very developer focused. So I think it would be an interesting exercise to actually look and see, where there is a lot of overlap and where some of those things could be incorporated. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. And as you said, the Venn diagram is really interesting because even with the digital public goods standard, they have this question of do no harm by design. And that is, of course, not in our standard for public code, since we are focusing on collaboration rather than a goal for the code base. But otherwise, it's almost like a perfect fit. So that's the only thing that goes outside.
Great, thanks. And also maybe just to acknowledge, I do know that we have had a fair bit of feedback from the global digital health community, certainly, that, there's a little bit of, I wouldn't say fatigue, but, it's just, why are there so many? And, is there some way of making it simpler to kind of streamline the process, to maybe also use a lot of that same information to be able to put it through different applications? So that is something that we're looking at.
Yeah, and that's super relevant because when we do an assessment here, and it's sort of like you're not reaching everything, but you get a sort of like a backlog of, oh, these are the things that we need to address in order to be compliant. And then you can sort of think, well, what are important for us right now? What is stopping our collaboration efforts? And then you can sort of like prioritize them and take them one by one as you go. You don't need to solve anything. So you can both see it as a long-term ambition, and it's also a little bit of a handbook in a sense, because it is a collection of good practices.
Great, thanks. I see a hand up. Arinda, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah. So in the details about the code base, there are a couple of points like document your object, document the code, use plain English, document code base maturity. So I just wanted to know what is the difference between document the code and document the code base maturity.
Yes, so when you really start to drill down on the requirements, so the code base maturity is really about what state are you in. So it's more of a meta level, like where, like if you're in a beta phase, and how you will document that, compared to when document the code, that is more like, well, what does this function do, or what does this module do, and so it's sort of like two different levels of documentation.
Thanks.
Okay, I do actually have one more question.
Mhm.
And that's really around, so one of the things that you said that sort of resonated with me was, and obviously you need buy-in from the developers, from the people working on the code base, but you mentioned the buy-in from management and policymakers being very important.
Mhm.
And that when you say that, that makes a lot of sense to me. But what I'd like to know is sort of how do you practically do that? How are some of the ways that you engage those groups of people?
Yeah, the most efficient part is, or a way that we have figured out so far, is to actually get everyone in the room at the same time, so that it's in any direction, from these three groups or levels or stakeholders, everyone knows each other's needs and wants. Because one of the things that we have encountered in many places is that the policymaker really buys into the idea, like, oh, open source, that is great. Policymakers are often driven by ideas, and they can see the idea behind open source and sort of buys into that. And for developers, it's often, not every developer has encountered it, but a lot of developers already have some sort of practical experience and know what the benefits are. So there might be both a push and a pull, but then the policymaker might forget that the management might need different ways of being measured or different kinds of budgets, so that they can enable the developers to be actually working on the collaboration. Because sometimes we see that developers know, oh, I should go document this, but we have this sprint and I'm being evaluated on that. I'm not being evaluated on this. And of course, that it could be some old goals that the management has to report upwards in the chain of command. So sort of like really try to get everyone together and see, oh, do we want to do this? All right, then what changes do we need to do in order to enable that way of working? So you're not getting stuck of something old that sort of like becomes a roadblock.
Great, thank you. And I really appreciate that you mentioned budget, because of course it does take resources to
Yes.
actually do this effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, ongoing resources.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions from our attendees? Okay, if not, I'm actually going to ask Ibrahima, would you be able to put up our poll for us, please? Right, okay, so you should now be able to see this on your screen. We'd really appreciate it if you could just give us a little bit of quick feedback. Some of it is for ourselves for our Digital Square webinar series, which we're going to be having monthly webinars for the rest of 2023. And we also do have one specific one around the public code standard. So if you could just take a little bit of time to fill that in, and then we will publish it in a minute or two. Okay, Ibrahima, would you like to publish those results? Great. Okay, so yeah, how relevant is this topic? Very relevant, obviously extremely relevant for all of us. And interestingly, we do have some where public code standards have been implemented. That's really interesting for me. And then what have we got in terms of other topics? Great. So we've got some about cybersecurity, report writing. Excellent. Okay, thank you so much. I think if we don't have any further questions or comments, I think we can wrap up this webinar a little bit early. On that note, two things. Again, just want to say thank you so much again, Jan, for talking to us and for sharing those details about the next meeting and, of course, to the actual website itself. And also for everyone else on this call, if you do think of other topics that might be of particular interest to you going forward, we'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, do keep a lookout for our next webinar, which will be towards the end of April. So, and sorry, one last thing, we will also be sharing the recording and the slides from this as well. So look out for those. But thank you again, everyone, for joining, and thank you, Jan.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Jan.